Okay, yeah. Um, as the title shows here, our discussion this week starts, and we will continue it for next session as well for about for with the discussion on the last judgment, heaven and hell. Um, this is a kind of one of the very important issues, especially when you go to the creeds of Muslims and the creeds that Quran defends or defines it. Uh, Especially in Quran, there is a discussion that uh, you know uh, the book describes how a faith is established in an individual as a Muslim, and Quran indicates that it's a belief to one God, it's a belief to his prophets and angels, and also the belief to the day of judgment, which is last judgment, where all, accordingly, all humans will face with their destination afterlife. Now, I mean, basically, when we go back to the history of religions and even those non-religion, I mean, non-Abrahamic, or maybe the communities that they do not have kind of official faces, uh, they do have sort of belief to hereafter, life after death. But the point is that when you talk about the life after death, then there is a kind of introduction to that. What is life to be continued after death, and what is the death? The question about the death is important because death, in another word, is the corruption of the body. When your body is not functioning, is not, functionable. So it means that there's an end to that material as body. Now, the question of life after death is another issue. Yes, you may think of, sometimes you die not for the reason that your body is not functioning well or is totally corrupted, but you die because of some, you know, accident, or you know, uh, being killed in a war scene, or being martyred, or whatever. But anyway, uh, the issue of life after death, for many, it was the question that gives meaning to life, especially to the, you know, also to kind of Abrahamic religion. The death, the life after death, gives meaning to this life that you have here. Otherwise, it was such as, according to them, it was not that powerful in a sense that it has a meaning, it has a goal. And basically, when we talk about life after death, then we do have another notion that um, the life is kind of a circle. There's a beginning and a return. When we talk about the hereafter, there's a notion, we don't say that at the end of the life, but we say that the return to the original place that you're coming from. Now, in the history of beliefs, I mean, probably if you go back to kind of early philosophical, discussions, your body is a house of clay, which is in religion as well. The body, or human body, is made out of clay, as Quran also as well mentions this. So this is a house of clay for something else, which is called soul or esprit. And when a spirit settles down here, it also, you know, moves out of it as well. So that's the basic general idea on the issue of, you know, uh, a return or the life after an apparent death, even for pagans as well. I mean, um, um, the diversity of ideas mm, attributed to the pagans, but Quran talks about pagans in a way that they are arguing against the life after death. I am talking about the pagans who were living around Muhammad at the time of in the time of Muhammad. So they were sort of, believing in something which was asking question. Really? Do you think that asking Muhammad, do you think that God will return us the bodies that are destroyed completely and totally, and after death? I mean, who gives life to this? And then that's the Quranic also arguments that says that the one who created it at the very beginning, originally, who he will be able, or he has the power to give life after death. Um, so the area, I mean, the Middle Eastern area, which was a kind of a ground for all those Abrahamic religion, Mesopotamian region, with its Judaism, Christianity, and Islamic faith in it. All of them, they, attributed, they created, or they came with the idea that there's a life after death. And then that was a major uh, uh, issue for all of those religions. I mentioned the meaning of life comes from the death. I mean, if death is the, I mean, from physical point of view, death is the, corruption of body. On the other hand, death metaphysically is a way to go through. I mean, the house of clay must be broken and the soul must go out. I mean, house of clay as a kind of old philosophical or mystical idea, kind of Platonic or Plato's ideas as well in Greek philosophy. But anyway, so religions as well, I mean, like Judaism, you should, in order to go to that life after death, you should be, the divine likeness. You should reach to the divine likeness, means that you should purify yourself in a way to have the merits of that life. Philosophers, they were saying that your soul, I mean, the soul has criteria from beginning from um, mineral soul to plant soul. Uh, I'm sorry, mineral soul to plant soul, and to animal soul, and finally to intellectual soul or rational soul. I mean, you will escape from, I mean, this is an old philosophical argument or idea that you will escape this circle of life, physical life, by reaching or jumping into the area of intellectual soul from animal soul that you are now. So that was kind of the ideas that was around the philosophers as well. But you see that in Hinduism, the idea of karma is in a sense that the circle of life. And then if you are good, I mean, the philosopher was saying that if you are jumped into the rational soul, you're gone, you're up, you are having your real life after this life. But again, here in karma, if you're good and good and good, so you go up. But if you're bad, if you have done bad thing in this life, you then go back to the life. But it depends on how bad or good you were. So whether in the you will appear as animal or whatever. Yeah, based on your own merits. Okay, now let's go back to the Quran as mentioned. When we discuss return, uh, the day of judgment, and issues like this in the Quran, um, based on the Quranic verse in chapter 6, verse 12, there is a name of God or a quality of Him that governs His other qualities. Let's say that we discussed before that God has names and attributes, and so we now want to emphasize that some of those names and attributes are kind of having priority to the other names and attributes based on this religious text. So imagine if the name of, if God has not created yet, there's no universe in the world. So his name of being creator, it appears that it is not there in action. So, however, that name exists in God and potentially, but not in action. So these are I'm trying to give this example of his names in action. But generally speaking about the hereafter, life after this, when Quran talks about this, it associates with one of God's name. So we know that when we talk about the life after this death, it's associated with the God as someone who is also giving life, taking life, and things like that. But those are another aspects of God. But now, when we look at this verse of Surah Al-An'am, chapter 6 of Quran, verse 12 says that it's to start with a question of, say, to whom belongs what is in the heaven and in the earth. So everything for God, so the issue of belonging and God possessing everything, and this, possessousness which is in God makes everything for Him, everything from Him, and then the idea is that a return of everything back to Him. There is another very famous verse in the Quran which says that we are from God and to Him we shall return. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That's also another aspect of this. So the ownership goes back to the Lord, to the God. And then now when he discusses about the issue of return, the verse one emphasized on one point that I was trying to make it. Say to God, He has prescribed for Himself mercy. So the mercy that is prescribed to God in this Islamic religious context is discuss about God being merciful and the name of mercy being prioritized when God speaks about the return. So that's another issue. I mean, sometimes you may say that, okay, which name of God may, govern the issue of return and judgment? They, one may say that, yeah, the justice, because he needs to punish the bad people. But the point is that uh, Quran here in this verse, which plays a kind of important role in discussion of return and God as the resurrector. Um, the point is that His mercy plays first an important role here, and then you may give place to justice and other issues, and um, next levels. And then he will surely gather you to the resurrection of which there is no doubt. So the issue of there is no doubt in something, um, as we mentioned, polytheists, pagans, they were discussing and questioning the very idea of return. Because if the body is, as if body and human being is seen as purely physical one, and then the world is described as this universe is described as, such as Aristotle puts, as the world of creation and corruption. So when something is corrupt, so what happens? Yeah, for some pagans, it says that no, there is no life after this. It's gonna destroy, and it's the identity of the human being is gonna destroy after death because his body is corrupted. If the identity of human being is his physical body, then the question was that how can it goes back? How can it go back to another life when it's totally disappeared or destroyed? So there's also this kind of discussion in the Quran, and um, we will touch them later. But I just wanted to emphasize this verse and to say that God starts with saying that Quran starts saying that God possesses everything, and it means that if everything returns to Him, with the meaning and the consequences that everything return to its own original owner. And then the idea is that the original owner of everything, which is God, is merciful. So a return must be going back to a merciful. This is what the book explains. And then there's no doubt about the day of judgment. And there's arguments and counter arguments of those people against Muhammad regarding the day of resurrection. And then say that Quran talks about those people who forfeited their souls, and they are far from God. They are distanced from God. They are not close to Him. So they choose to uh, um, to go away from that center or whatever point, which is God. So by the very act of disbelieving, by the very act of not being faithful to Him. So here's the point. God want to say, or Quran want to state that if someone is gonna end up in the hellfire, this is the result of what he has been doing. Now, this verse itself talks about, again, I want to kind of a good point by point. This verse, according to the Quranic commentators, and Muslim commentators of Quran goes back to emphasize on one, the ownership of God. The word is belonging to God, and He is essentially merciful. And there is a question of being essentially merciful, or essentially mercifulness of God, because the point is that some of commentators, like probably it was Alusi, and who was kind of discussing this point, whether his mercy is upon a group of people, imagine for the faithfuls, or it includes every being. And so, as mentioned, also there is a discussion of the resurrection day, and which is indubitable day. There's no doubt about that in Islamic teachings, and then the relationship between forfeiture of the soul and lack of belief, which is kind of gives you information that this action and the result and consequences are based on what a person or individual does. So the unconditional mercifulness of God also plays a role, as I said. It governs other names of God. If God has different kind of names, different aspects, different functions and qualities, there's one thing that governs other qualities, and that's the mercifulness based on this verse here. Now, when we discuss about the very idea of resurrection, the very idea of life after death, the point is that in the Islamic culture, or the history of Islamic commentary or theology, or even the mystical discussion, Sufism, philosophers, they come up with question. There are different schools of thought in Islamic history discussing one important major question. The major question is whether human being has a free will or he is predetermined. You may imagine that, okay? I'm predetermined. I'm living right now, but I didn't decide to live at this moment, with a certain race or whatever. So always, it's kind of for human mind, it's okay. It's predetermined that you will be born from this parents. You will be living in this world like for such a period of time, and then you will pass away and die at a certain time that you don't know about that, and you do not, in most of cases, you do not have control of unless you do commit something, commit suicide. Then you'd say that, okay, this is the time that I'm going to commit it, and then I'm ending my physical life. But generally speaking, there are things that are kind of predetermined, and you probably cannot decide about them. However, there are more discussion in detail. But let's imagine that you are predetermined. You have no control over those things. But again, the main question is whether human being has a free will or is obliged. Now, the relationship between this discussion and the discussion of hereafter is clearly connected. If there is no free will, if human is not able to decide about his own behavior, his own face, or his own school of thought and things like that, then he won't have a free will. And then based on that predetermination, one cannot ask a human being why did you do such and such, and why you didn't do such and such? Why did you, perform that bad act? So there is no question of actually punishment here, because it's nonsense. It's not rational to ask people for why they did such and such while they have no free will and no choice to do this and that. So, in order to have the discussion of resurrection and life after death in a kind of meaningful setting in the Quran, uh, the discussion of free will is essential. But later on, I mean, you can see that in Islamic history of thought and Islamic intellectual history, you do have a group of people that more emphasize on pre-described, determined aspects of human reality. And so that school also opposed by those who were believing that no human being has free will, unless, I mean, otherwise it's unjust for a God to punish human being for what he didn't have control over. I mean, and that's the discussion, I mean, which was created lots and lots of literature in Islamic history and different schools of theology as well. I mean, one of them, like Ash'arites, more inclined to say that everything is quite predetermined, and the very strong opposition to them were Mu'tazilite, and also later on Shiites with them. I mean, sort of Mu'tazilite and Shiites are in one kind of under one umbrella of, okay, let's say that there's a free will, and mostly Asherites are known to be inclined with the idea of predestination. This also it is, as far as I know, is narrated from six Shia Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, when they ask him about he's in the 2nd century, I mean, head of Shia theological school, when they ask him about the if whether human being has free will or he is predetermined, he described the point that neither nor. He says that uh, 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 the condition is in between these two, 2 points, not fully free will and not fully predetermined. He will be asked about the things that he did with his choice. But overall, God as sin, but reacting to human being, to human practices and performances based on the merciful name, the name that covers other aspects of God. And also, this verse also talks us and tell us about the consequences of those things that human being freely choose. If he was not freely able to choose, whether faithful or unbeliever or whatever, then there was no rational in punishing him. Now, there's also in Quranic verses, the many times human being is make God describe himself to give time for in this life, to give time for those who are unfaithful and then give time for them to return. Also, the mercifulness. The mercifulness that we were discussing in the verse was Tabrisi and Al-Awsi were questioning whether it's for all or for some Muslims. Uh, as I mentioned, it seems that Al-Awsi is trying to say that it's for Muslim, but Tabrisi and others are, especially Al-Kashani as well. He emphasized the inclusiveness of this mercy, and God, or the divine, in this aspect, prescribed himself mercy. And then another philosophical questions or theological questions rises here that, do you mean that God is also governed by, by some rules? Wasn't he the ruler of the world? And then you may say that, oh, yeah, he is ruled by some. One of the philosophical answers to this question was that he is not governed by the rules that are coming out of him. He puts rules. He is the one who prescribes the rules, and he is the one who follows those rules in accordance, because his nature is, to be merciful, and then mercy precedes and governs his other names and attributions in this case. Now, discussing about the Day of Judgment in the Quran. The Quran talks about the Day of Judgment and the Day of Return with different names. And those are as following: Yawm ad-Din, the Day of Judgment. So Deen here doesn't mean that Deen as a religion. I mean, religion in Quranic language is called Deen, but Yawm ad-Din here is translated and rendered to us the Day of Judgment. Also, there is another one, Yawm al-Akhirah, or Yawm al-Akhirah, means that the last day. So the last day, imagine the last day on the earth, the last day, or probably we can talk about the end of the time as well in other Christian or Judaism culture as well. The other one is the Yawm al-Qiyamah. This one is exactly rendered to Day of Resurrection, because the idea is that people rise up from or resurrect from their graves. They come out of, they come out from their graves and they join a gathering and meeting. Whether these are symbolical or, literal, but so there is the idea of having all people in one scene of judgment is prescribed in religious texts. Also, it is called As-Sa'a, the hour. So this is, if I'm correctly remember, in the chapter Moon, Surah Al-Qamar, which was starting with اقتربت الساعة, the hour is closed. Being closed means that it is closed and we are near the end of time. The other one is Yawm al-Fasl, the day of separation. Why this name is given to this is that because according to this Quranic literature, every human being will be alone there. Everyone is there, but everyone is alone there, because everyone is taking care of himself, as facing his or encountering his own good or bad deeds, and then no one can help another one. No parents and children are together, but they are individually separated beings confronting their own, you know, good or bad deeds and the last judgment of God. And, you know, whether they enter into an eternally joyful life or to hell. Also, Yawm al-Jam'ah, the opposition to this Yawm al-Fasl is the Yawm al-Jam, which is a day of gathering. But this one also could emphasize on the fact that, as we mentioned in the verse that we have already discussed, as he is the gatherer, he's the one who gathers everyone, every dead person, every dead body which is under the grave, and he gives life again and then gathers them in the sea. I mean, when we discuss this aspect of Day of Judgment, one point is that, so, and one very, very important philosophical question is that whether the judgment, the Day of Judgment, whether the hereafter, we need this physical body or we don't. This is hugely discussed, and there was a kind of a strong opposition between philosophers and theologians based on the philosophical notion and argument that the world we are living now is the physical world, which needs, in which human body or human being needs to have this form of physical body. In a hereafter, the rules of hereafter, the rules that are governing hereafter, are not the rules that governing this world. In another world, the intellectual world, the spiritual world is spiritual, is not physical. So philosophers were always challenging the idea. I mean, they had always a problem in making argument for a physical, resurrection of bodies, because kind of no sense for them. But a philosopher like Avicenna, who is a very important philosopher in Islamic history of thought, he says that he can find out that Quran also emphasized on a spiritual resurrection, or the souls of human beings that are, continuing life in hereafter. But there is also this discussion about human, like you, the very physical part of human being also participates in the Day of Judgment. So this will be, I mean, this is discussed hugely, and some people say that Quran more emphasizes on the bodies. Some people also try to say that this is not the issue of physical body mostly, but also Quran talks about nafs, which is a translation of the soul, and the resurrection of the nafs, or its life at hereafter, and the fact that nafs, or esprit, being originated from God, is something that is eternal. I mean, in a sense that which is not going to face death, but kind of has the ability or quality of living eternally. And then also another name for this occasion in the Quran is Yawm al-Talaq, which is also the day of meeting, in which everyone meets with his destination, with the judgment and with God. And then also the other question is that whether meeting with God is kind of a meeting that a visible God or the visibility of God is discussed or not. I guess minority probably of Muslim thinker emphasized on a visible God, I mean, especially philosophers, and most of the theologians are accepted that God is not visible, and at least it cannot be seen by physical eye, but they emphasize on seeing God by heart or by eyes of heart. Okay. Now, there's one thing about the discussion of hereafter in the Quran. We know that Quran was revealed to Muhammad in two different parts of his life. I mean, in two different places, at least, Mecca and Medina. Mecca and Medina, two different cities that Muhammad lived in. But if we analyze the verses, the Meccan verses, one of the important aspects of those verses revealed to Muhammad are discussing the very issue of resurrection, the very issue of there's a life after death. You're not finished. You're not finished by this death. This is just another, giving you a rebirth. Your soul is not dying, you're going to. So why Quran talks about all these things? The issue is that, when you do have the idea of resurrection, then you should take care of your action and performance in this life. Okay? Be careful. Do not act or perform in a negative way. Always be positive or do good and things like that. Be faithful. Understand your God and know why are you living here and how you should live accordingly if there's a God. And also there's, you see this verse, chapter 7, verse 187. The question is that God tells to Muhammad, they will ask you about the hour. As we mentioned, that the hour is also another name to day of resurrection. When will be its appointed time? Say, the knowledge thereof is with my Lord alone, and none but He can reveal its time. Though the heavens and the earth are pregnant with it, it will come upon you without warning. So every time, in another way, it says that it's very close. The time is arriving, but it never says that when it's exactly arriving. Many people, you can imagine with those, most of the verses of the Quran talking about, especially in Mecca, talking about the day of resurrection, and people are waiting for the day of resurrection, maybe in 50 years, maybe sooner, because the tone of Quran says that the hour is coming. So people say, oh, when is it then? And God says that only I know, and only I can reveal its time, and no one else. So you all should be ready. So the idea is that the readiness to be ready with to be ready for facing this day of judgment. But also another point is that those who are not following the rules of God, or those who are not following the message of God, and that they are going astray, they are according to the Quranic literature, they are indeed those deniers, those who deny the aspect of Muhammad being prophet, or Quran being a word of God. or any, I mean, those deniers of messengers of God, in this sense, says that they will meet God until suddenly the hour is upon them. Uh, so let's just speak. So the hour is coming. The time is coming. Uh, Consequently, you should be uh, ready for this encountering this reality of your life. So, Mekansuras, in a way, are talking about this aspect, this problem very much, as far as they are also talking about the oneness of God. They're talking about the God, there's one God, there's a creator, he is such and such, the qualities that he has, and also they're talking about day of judgment. If you go to the chapter 30th of the Quran, I'm sorry, the part 30th of Quran, the very final part of Quran. Also, we can find more and more emphasis on the day of judgment, of the arriving of the time, and things like that. Now, as I mentioned briefly before and earlier, is that those polytheists are challenging the very idea of day of resurrection or the life after this. You know, so there are different kind of questions that polytheists, atheists, or pagans are asking Muhammad. Shall I die and then be brought forth alive? This is one question, one sort of question. The other question is, shall we be dust and we and our fathers, and shall we then be brought forth again? So, and then the Quranic answer to those are like this. Don't you remember that we created him before from nothing? Again, do you not see how God originates creation, then repeats? For God, it's easy. So they are asking, okay, when a dead body becomes as a dust and nothing, you cannot even at the end identify if there is any body. It's completely dust now after 1,000 years, imagine. Who's going to give life? Who's going to make it an identical human being? God says it's easy for me. So that's one of the one who at the beginning created it from nothing can create it again from the dust or whatever remaining of it. And that's the question. That's the going on discussion in the Quran regarding the issue of hereafter. And then, as I mentioned, the closeness of it. They see it distance, but we see it near. The nearness of the day of judgment. Day of judgment also in the Quran are combined or associated with other other thing that will happen on the earth, and which are kind of announcing the hour, and they are associated with the day of judgment. We are talking about the day of judgment at this moment, and those among those things is that when the sun is folded up and the star fall and go out, so a darkness. When there is no sun, there is a darkness, at least in our planet. And so when the stars are fall, and then the mountains vanish, and then the she-camel, 10 months pregnant, are left neglected. The camels for the Arab culture was important, and it was pregnant, and there is another new camel coming for the family. that's the 10 months, and that's the last one. But they were very careful, behaving very good with those camels. But it says that even those camels, that's the a symbolic way of saying that the very important things, your, you know, your Apple, um, very modern computer, so leave it alone. You leave your wallet alone, you leave whatever you have alone, and then that's the day of judgment. So the kind of the scene that seems to be very dramatic, very also fearing, think that, okay, let's say that how Quran talks about this day of judgment. It seems that Quran talks in different ways. We discussed on in chapter 6, verse 12, that is, there is a God, merciful God, but when he want to talk and warn unbelievers, and when he want to, give a warning, says that, you know what, in the day of judgment, such and such very frightening things are going to happen, and if you're not from the right hand, right hand, Quran emphasizes and differentiate people from the right and left. The rightists are the ones that they're doing good, they did the good, they were faithful, and the leftists are kind of those evil doers or bad doers or unfaithful and whatever. So when he talks about those people, and when he talks with those faithful about the day of judgment, he tells us that, gardens for you, prepare, whatever you can imagine is there for you. But when also, on the other hand, talks to, generally talks about this aspect of resurrection, talks about, wow, there is a noise, there's a huge noise, and that noise is a sudden, which just suddenly tells you that this is the hour. Everything is finished. You do not have time. Everything is, it's time to go now. And so you do not have an option to say that, oh, wait a minute, I want to do a good thing. I want to do good things and things like that. There's no time for that. And then get ready. And those are, you can find them on chapter 81, verse 1, chapter 69, verse 13, and chapter 101. As mentioned, also another aspect of this was the separation. We mentioned that the name of the Day of Judgment was the Day of Separation. Chapter 82, verse 18 and 19 talks about it. What shall tell you what is the Day of Judgment, a day when no one can help another, for the command that that day is God's. So the ruler is God. No one can help anyone else. Even parents cannot help and cannot help their kids. Every individual facing his God. And then, so if there is such a day, then it tells you that fear a day when a father cannot help his son, not the child, aid its father. And then no one can bear the burden of another. That's another thing. The idea is that maybe someone can, maybe someone can help you. Maybe, maybe you pay someone to say that, okay, I'll go to hellfire instead of you. There's not such an option. The day of separation is appointed for them all, the day when no friend can help a friend, nor be aided, except those on whom God is merciful. With this very last part of the last verse that I just recited, except those on whom God is merciful. Maybe we go back to say that, okay, there will be kind of help in the day of resurrection for those on whom God is merciful and who they are, that in those days God is merciful to them. Everyone, someone, a group of people. But here, we started from the mercy of God, and we are coming here at in the continuation of this discussion, reaching to the point that God talks about the day of judgment, and then asks people, it's a day of separation, and you should fear that day. And then the idea of help. Who is going to help those people? It's also very discussed hugely. But basically, everyone's good deed is going to help him in the Quran sense. And there's another question of intercession. We will discuss it later on. Also, when God talks about the day of judgment, Quran talks about the day of judgment, it mentions that people are gathering before God and the angels on the day that the spirit and angel will stand in ranks. So also, along with God, angels are there, and the angels will be on either side, and it will be the throne of your Lord. So 8 of the angels were holding the throne of your Lord. All these things could mean or could interpret symbolically, because again, according to this literature, to the Quranic literature, God is not a physical, real entity, and his throne therefore should not be a physical entity that angels are carrying it. All these things, in most cases, were interpreted in another way, in a kind of symbolic way. Now, let me go back to the Day of Judgment again. Okay, we were talking about the very issue of Day of Resurrection in the Quran, and we reached to the point to talk about one, God is merciful when He describes his behavior toward the resurrection, his behavior toward his creations and the universe, and then whether that mercifulness is conditional or unconditional. We saw that majority of the commentators that talk about an unconditional mercy toward everything, because the creation itself is a kind of mercy upon the universe and created beings. And also when the day of judgment, when you talk about the day of judgment, there are different stages in which God talks to people. When He talks to the faithful, He talks in a way, He talks to the evildoers or unfaithful. He talks in another way. But why? Because the nature of day of resurrection and life after death, in the Quranic context, is that to some people it should give a good news, and to some other addresses the fear and the problems that he may face. So that's why you do have kind of apparently paradoxical or different kind of message that Quran puts and by which addresses the same thing for people. Now, and that's also another name that God gives to Muhammad as as bearer of good news and also as the warner. One point here is that, as I mentioned, the mercifulness. We talked about the chapter 6, verse 12, in which God says that He prescribed mercy upon Himself. So, I mean, this mercifulness that God follows, or it governs God's action, may cause a question, as we mentioned, that so God, as a ruler, as someone, as the one who nothing governs him, how it's possible that something governs God? And if you remember, we discussed in the chapter 112 that we discuss about God, but emphasizing on his essence and his names. And here's the discussion that at this time we're talking about God's names, that they are interacting with each other. And that interaction is, in a sense, that you will have one name, an equality that governs the another names and quality. So it comes primary like merciful, and secondary like punishing the bad ones. Primarily, he is merciful, giving life to all. Secondarily, and consequently, is punishing the ones or warning the ones who are doing bad, and also gives the time for to return to good and things like that. So, but generally speaking, that mercifulness is not something that governs God in a way that it controls him, but it's in a way that his names are interacting, at least in Islamic sense. Now, continuing with the discussion of the Day of Judgment, the point is that Quran also talks about a book. It talks about in chapter 69, in that day you will be brought into the open, and nothing that you concealed will remain hidden. He who receives his book in his right hand will say, "Look, read my book." So the idea of book, not book as Quran, but book as your book, a human book, and the book of your deeds is also mentioned in the Quran. And then the point is that if people are given their books in their right hands, and then if they are given the book in their left hands, again, we're not discussing about the physical things. We're discussing that symbolically, that if book is given to the right hand, means that, okay, the good deeds are weight more than bad deeds, or there is no bad deeds and more absolutely good deeds. And his right hand, people of right hand, a group of right hand. And then on the opposition, if he receives his book in his left hand, he'll say, "Wow, would that I had not received my book, and that I had never known my account." So that's kind of sense of tries to give the sense that a person, an individual, may receive or may feel on the Day of Judgment. I mean, Quran depicts those moments, and really moments, in which what happens if someone's book is in his left hand. And then he also narrates us about the times and what people say that, "Oh, can I go back and return? may I have more time on walking? And then when he's dead, it's a voice coming to him, a sound coming to him or her saying that it's done. Your time is done and you're not supposed to go back. So the idea of book also is associated with the idea of two angels in Islam, that bearing witness, always being with human being and writing his good and bad deeds. And that's writing is, in a sense, that more Islamic literature discuss about this, in a sense that if you do the good thing, there's a right angel and left angel. The right angel is his duties is to write good deeds, and the left one is ascribed to write the bad deeds. So when you do a good thing in this context, Hadith literature tells us that the right hand, immediately goes, the angel writes down what you did. And if you do a bad thing, the left angel waits for hours and hours to see if you repent, if you be, kind of regret of what you did. If you return to God and ask God to forgive that, so it's not going to be written. But if you don't, after a while, it will be written. So now, giving way to good and bad things and deeds is the one that automatically makes a judgment possible. So it's not the case that the idea is not that in the Quran, in the Day of Judgment, they start to open your book and look at this, but it's like a movie, very long movie, but a person can see it in very short time, in which he goes back and see every moment of his life, how he behaved, even before birth. And then the point is that now someone may talk to God and say that, no, wait a minute, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And in that occasion also you have Quran talks about that, and then it says that when their tongue is denying something, we let their body to start talking. Their hand will talk and say that, yes, this person did this bad thing with me, but the leg starts, yes, he did, he went to that such and such, doing such and such bad thing, and I'm witnessing this. So that's in the Quranic term is the proof of God, and nothing can be, and he's the best one who brings the proof. This is the God, according to the Quran. So the rating and the balance. Now, Quran wants people at least to have a balance, and that's way. I mean, not balance in a way that, okay, do like 50 sin and then do it 50 good. There's an idea of, again, goes back to the mercifulness of God. And in Islamic literature, it says that the good deeds of washing away the bad deeds, that's one thing. But so what makes someone ends up in the hell is the weight that the bad deeds are heavier than the good deeds. That's the way that Quran talks, and that's the point, that when you have those books in hand, unbeliever will led to hell, and and then those believer will go to the paradise. But while those bad unbelievers and bad doers, one may talk about, so what? Wait a minute. What about people who never saw a prophet or who never learn about those messengers of God? What happens to them? Uh, at least Quran tells us that the God of Quran will not punish them because they didn't know about this. And, if they did good things, they do face the good things. But also levelized, I mean, the idea of the paradise is not one place. Paradise, like, your hotel. You go to a 3-star hotel, you go to motel, you go to 5-star, 7-star, you go to 4-star hotel. And so the point is that the separation comes over there based on the deeds and the faithfulness of those people that they have. But the people that they didn't know about the reality of one thing, the reality of a message of God. So they will face also their destiny based on the good things that they did. And the performance of the things that they are doing, if it is based on a good judgment of their own mentality, whether something is good or bad. Now, when also Quran talks about the good and bad people, in a sense, when those who are leading to the hell will be asking that, didn't you see? Did not messengers came to you to recite the signs of your Lord, warning you that you would meet this day? And they will say yes. That's the point that Quran talks about punishment, in a sense that if you say that, no, never, I've never seen anyone talking to me, then it's another thing. You remember we discussed about the free will? There must be a free will to be a day of judgment, and there must be a, messenger warning, something like that. Then people be judged based on their knowledge about the reality of something that God talks about. So Quran in this sense also talks about, imagine if someone doesn't know at all about those things, then his title is not unbeliever. His title is something else. The title, people that they don't know, they never received the message. And so we go back to another issue, which is more discussed in depth in the Islamic tradition and also in other religions. The point is that if someone is doing quite good in this life, but not perfectly good, and in the day of judgment, he is, in a sense that, he's in between two things. He may have some bad deed. Oh, and then there's an idea. If you do bad things, it's two kind of bad things is ascribed in discussed in the Quran and Islamic religious text. One sort of bad things are the ones that you do back to yourself. I mean that, okay, you have to perform something if you are faithful and you don't do those things. Imagine if you have to pray and you don't pray. It's between you and your Lord, your God. But there are some other kind of bad things that you do bad things to other people. You lie them, you foolish them, you bully them, you can imagine. You sell them the things that are not good, that are not in a good shape or don't have a good quality, and you lie them about that. All those deeds, all those bad deeds, according to this text, are categorized in between you and other people. And the only way to get rid of all those bad deeds that you did, you have to ask other people to forgive you. If they forgive you, then God says, welcome to paradise. If they don't forgive you, then you have to face the hellfire, uh, unless they forgive you. So it's between you and other people. Now, there's another question. What if God says that, okay, there are some people that they are not satisfied with what you did to them, and you also have done, a good deal of good things and good deeds, and your prophet is also there. We discussed that God and prophets and angels will be present in the day of judgment. So what about those things? The point is that if there is a prophet, you may ask your prophet, you may ask the saint or whatever to intercess between you and those people, or between you and God, asking that, oh, the sin is described like this. You ask, could you please ask God to forgive me? Could you please, because you have a high, level, you are more respected in the eye of God, and then I ask you to, because I believed you, I followed you, I tried to be a good one, such and such things. Could you please mediate in a way that I get rid of this problem and get out of the situation that I'm in. Now, in the Quranic sense, you do have two different versions of this intercession. One who says that there's no intercession except after his permission. Okay, so God gives permission to whom? Let's say to prophet. And then prophet does the mediatory things. And the second, those on whom they call will have no power to intercede. Now, the discussion here is about polytheists of Mecca, especially, and those idols that they were worshipping. The idea was that those idols will intercede between them and God. They were serving those idols in order to ask them in the hereafter, probably, or in any occasion, they mediate between them and God. So that's why we call them polytheists, because they were theists, but they were not, as their religion was not associated with one God, but associated with numbers of gods, some of them made by themselves. There was another God was created, the big God, but there were like idols that trying to intercede. They were believing into intercessions of those gods. Now, the discussion, there's in Islamic, also in Islamic tradition, Islamic history, you do have a general idea of intercession that, prophet, maybe martyrs, saints, maybe those who were close to God, being able to, intercess. But also you do have an idea that no, there's no intercession. So, but Quranic verses also talk about intercession in a way that the God permission, but God doesn't give the idea is that God doesn't permit an idol to intercess, because it says that they have no power to intercede. And then God gives power to those who can intercede. It discussed, especially in Islamic school of Salafism, it's less, they incline not to accept this kind of things. but in different kind of Sunni school as well, they do have it, and in Shiite school, they do positively, I mean, inclined to say yes, there is, especially for Prophet and their imams and their martyrs and their saints, as well as like you have it Christianity or Judaism as well. So the discussion of Day of Judgment in the Quran is kind of including like a good number of verses, a good number of literature over there, and it associates, and there are companies of many different ideas and discussions, whether in the Quran or later on in the history of Quranic commentary, and then later on in Islamic theological schools. I would like to stop here for this session, and we will continue in this next session discussing more about the commentators on the Day of Judgment and life after this, after death in the Quran. I thank you very much for your being patient and listening and watching my video. Thank you very much. See you next time.